What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. This is your host, Bilburn Bethelstone, and I'm his assistant, Adelina. Today we are having another episode of our Deep Dive series, today looking at the magic of the rope trick.
Yeah, so rope trick. So I showed Adelina, who is back after a lengthy hiatus, the classic Indian rope trick spell on YouTube, you know? And after having watched that, Adelina, I wanted to ask you.
Oh no.
There is a spell in Dungeons & Dragons called rope trick.
Wait, really?
That's what we're talking about today.
Wait, is it based off the rope trick from the Indian?
It is, and so I just wanted to ask you, what do you think a spell like rope trick would do?
I don't know, you just use a flute and it conjures up some snake. I don't know, people use that flute to conjure up a snake. It's kind of like the same with the rope.
Yeah, but then they probably call it snake trick, right? So it actually does involve a rope, but, you know, like, seriously, like, it climbs in the air. What do you think is going to end up happening?
Maybe it ties up the enemy.
That is a darn good conjecture. But what it in fact does makes it one of the most overpowered spells in the game.
What?
When I first started looking at the player's handbook, you know, a year and a half ago to start my campaign, I was looking at all of the spells since I was planning on playing a wizard.
Wait, you read every spell?
I skimmed most of them, but I really only, looked in depth at like the first, second, third level spells, because those were the only ones that I was going to be casting anytime soon.
Oh.
And rope trick was the very first one where I was like, that can't be right. Like, that is just like way overpowered, right? Like, that can't be right. And so that was the first one I literally started checking for like errata and stuff to see if they'd fixed it. And they didn't, and I could not believe that this was an available spell. I went to my DM, and I was like, we gotta talk about this rope trick spell. Like, I mean, you're not gonna let me cast that, right? I mean, that's banned, right?
Wait, but how is it overpowered if it's just a rope?
Well, I'm gonna explain, darling. But it was just, it's so powerful that I literally couldn't believe that he was going to let me cast it. We talked about it, and he's like, it seems fine to me. And I was like, but you can read what it does, right? I mean, I feel guilty casting that. This is like, I'm going to win every time if I start casting this. He's like, well, you can cast it. And so I was literally too embarrassed to even ever cast it. I was like, if I have to cast this, I feel like I'm not even trying. So I never cast it. And because I was kind of killing it with Minor Illusion, which is a really good spell that you get, right away. And so I never felt like I needed to use rope trick. But I actually ended up using it once because my DM was annoyed that I was such a slippery little bastard with like my Minor Illusions, and then I was like always hiding using the environment. And so he like set it up where I was in a narrow tunnel, and then there was a trap that like collapsed the tunnel behind me. I couldn't go anywhere, and then he stuck a freaking cloud kill, and I was like level 5, so I had like 30 hit points, and cloud kills do like crazy damage. And then I was in this narrow tunnel, and a bunch of people were started shooting lightning bolts down it.
Oh.
And everybody in the party was freaking out, and I was like, I cast rope trick. Because it is absolutely amazing. So let's take a look at what this spell does and why it is so good. So I've put the spell description on the screen so that you can check it out. It's 2nd level spell, a 1-action combat cast, no crazy components, it lasts for an hour, it doesn't require sight, and it's available to wizards and artificers. So let's break this down. First, you can use it to secure a short rest for the whole party. Lasts 1 hour, so pretty elegant for that. It's somewhat redundant when Tiny Hut comes online because that's a ritual. And so it will certainly allow you to take a short rest as well as a long rest. And so you will probably want to cast that instead of wasting a slot on Rope Trick. But Rope Trick is invisible, so it is better subterfuge in scenarios where there is high enemy density. Tiny Hut's visibility is a liability versus wandering enemies that can dispel magic, or that can set ambushes for when the tiny hut comes down. That's a pretty rude awakening when you walk out of your rest and you immediately get attacked by prepared enemies. However, what really makes this spell overpowered is that you can combat cast it as an ultimate defense, which can technically protect the entire party, It essentially gives you the ability to create mass invisibility at 3rd level. But in practice, it is more of an individual or caster defense. You can't spit arrows out of it or anything, so the marshals are going to probably not take advantage of it. Rules as written, it blocks attacks and spells, but there are other abilities in the game. So ask your DM if it blocks, say, Dragon's Breath, Beholder Rays, the drone effect of a Chasme, all of those things that are not attacks or spells, but still create magical effects. Personally, in my opinion, Rules as intended is that it would block those things. I mean, the spell effect creates an extra dimensional space, which to me, it would just block everything that comes, that exists on a different plane of existence. But it is certainly up to the DM. And if he agrees with me, its only real weakness is Dispel Magic. If you're facing enemies that can dispel magic, it's not hugely useful, and I would probably opt for a Stone Shape. But that said, it is not perfect. It's also got a weakness in that enemies can access the rope or the portal. And Rules as written, flying creatures can access the portal without the rope. The description says that it creates an invisible portal, so there is an opening there, and the rope can be used to enter it. But it would say must if the rope was required, so it seems like you can enter this portal if you fly through it. So that's one way that the DM might attack you where this isn't going to help you too much if it's a swarm of flying creatures. And also note that the rope itself can be attacked and is easily destroyed. So even if you pull the rope up and then lower it, someone can ready a fireball or whatever and just destroy the rope straight away. So you can enter and exit via the rope, although again it is ambiguous as to whether the rope is necessary. And recall that climbing does cost double your move, but it shouldn't call for an athletics check as the conditions are not negative. And as I read it in the player's handbook, you only need to make an athletics check if there are negative conditions, but of course it's up to the DM. You can always put knots in the rope to make the DM feel better. And note that you can climb down the rope to attack on your turn and then climb back up to safety. That seems OP to me, but there is nothing in the rules as written that says that doing so is an end condition. Therefore, it's not an end condition, even though I do think it's a decent leverage point for nerfing if the DM wants to try and dial this spell back a little bit. Now, some players may just want to poke their head out of the rope trick. I personally think that's pretty nuts and that this spell is already crazy powerful without trying to make it even better. I do think you need to crawl completely out of it and expose yourself. But you can make that argument, maybe the DM will agree. And that said, I don't even know that it's necessary if you have lethal concentration spells on the field. I mean, it's not like an extra cantrip around really makes that much difference, whereas exposing yourself to the disruption of your concentration would make a pretty big difference and is a pretty large tactical downside. So honestly, when I use it, I really never come out of it after I go in. Now, of course, you can pull up the rope to create a fully invisible portal and defend the rope against swarming of enemies. And rules as written, pulling up the rope does not specify that it requires an action, therefore it only requires your interact with object. Again, this is a point of nerfing that DMs might choose to employ. And you only get one interact with object per round, but you can combine with an ally, a familiar, or a summon to lower and raise the rope in one round. For example, the caster lowers the rope using his interact with object, then climbs down to cast, climbs back up once he's done casting his spell, and then his ally raises the rope. This way he can only be targeted by readied actions. Now, I found that it is a particularly strong tactic to use the rope trick in areas of heavy obscurement. This requires the enemy to use its reaction and beat your spell save DC on an Arcana check to know that rope trick was even cast. If they don't, you just disappear off the field, or at least the sounds that you were making disappear off the field. They won't know that it was a rope trick, and therefore they won't know that their only viable tactic against it is to dispel magic or to swarm the rope. It will obscure the location of the portal as they can't see the rope, and can thus protect the portal location from flying creatures. The flying creatures won't be able to see the rope, they won't be able to see PCs moving in and out of it, and so they're going to have a much tougher time infiltrating it. And the heavy obscurement will protect from readied actions that require sight, which takes a bunch of really lethal spells off the table, so I like casting rope trick in heavy obscurement. Now note that the rope can be any length up to 60 feet. It doesn't have to be 60 feet. Personally, I prefer a 5-foot rope because it's just much easier handling and I can place it out of reach by flying. Although note that if you put the portal too high up, you do create the risk of falling damage if it gets dispelled. So you're going to have to manage that. And another way to use it is just to create an anchor point so that you can elevate a lengthy rope up to 60 feet for climbing purposes. You can get out of a pit trap or scale a 60-foot cliff or something. So it's not just for defense, but it does offer a little bit of utility as well. Now, the extra-dimensional nature of the space prevents abilities from manifesting on the other side, and many abilities require being within a certain distance, which Rope Trick thwarts. As Jeremy Crawford says, you are infinitely far away from each other. So, for example, you couldn't control your Echo if you were an Echo Knight, since that requires it to be within 30 feet of you. However, you can maintain concentration on a spell even if you're in another plane. As per sage advice, range is irrelevant when it comes to concentration. The Rope Trick will protect you from scrying attempts, although the 1 hour duration isn't particularly handy in that regard, but you can at least rest easy while you're inside of it knowing that you can't be scryed. One clever way to use it is to enter it and then use plane shift instead of teleport to get to a location on the prime material plane. Because with plane shift, you don't need to know the location very well as per the teleport spell. You can just generally specify where you want to go, and it will take you there with no chance of mishap as per the teleport spell. So both plane shift and teleport are 7th level spells, but it's nice to be able to dial it in a little bit better using this tactic. And one thing I should point out, it doesn't cause a bag of holding to explode. The Rope Trick isn't an item, and if you look at the description of the bag of holding in that particular explosion effect, it requires 2 items to be stuffed into each other. Do note that Mike Merles once wrongly tweeted to the contrary, so be aware that, yeah, he's wrong. He's got to learn to read the description. So while Rope Trick is an elite defensive spell, it can be used offensively. I mean, it is ideal for setting up an ambush. You can just hide your entire party in there, and then when the target mark arrives, you just dogpile him. And you can theoretically drop lethal stuff on your enemies, maybe fill it up with oil and alchemist fire or heavy rocks or something, and then lure a target underneath with treasure or some such. And then you can just dismiss your concentration and all of that stuff is going to fall out and hit this person. That's kind of stretching it to me, but if you really want to try and use it that way, I don't see any reason that you can't. But it is mostly a defensive spell, in my opinion. So, yeah, that was Rope Trick. What did you think, darling?
It does seem overpowered. Maybe not too overpowered. I mean, there could be spells better than it. Could be. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm just saying there's not really. I mean, Dispel Magic will attack it, but there's not too many creatures out there that have Dispel Magic in their block. You can swarm it and you can attack the rope, but there's really not much you can do.
You said they were in the first, 1, 2, and 3, right?
What?
You said you were looking at the one...
Yes, but that was all chronological. I was looking at 1, 2, and 3, so that's why it was the first one that leaped out to me. There are other overpowered spells, but they're higher than 2nd level. So, in any case, that's Rope Trick. It's the spell that is so powerful that I'm embarrassed to cast it because I almost think like it's an indictment of my skills as a wizard. But sometimes I do cast it because, you know, when you're in a tiny tunnel and you've got a caved in behind and you can't go anywhere, and there's a cloud kill between you and the exit, and they're spitting lightning bolts down it, it's a good time to cast Rope Trick. So that's it. Thanks so much for watching. This has been the Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition Power Gamers Tactics Room. I'm your host, Bill Brown Bafflestone, and this has been my lovely assistant,
Adelina.
See you next time.